Nay, Ned know who they were walking into that room to face. When my in-law's lawyer straightened his tie, looked up from his notes, and said, "Good afternoon, Dr. Renner," the color drained from my mother-in-law's face so fast I thought she might faint right there in the consultation room. My father-in-law gripped the armrest of his chair. Neither of them said a word. I had waited 9 years for a moment like that. Not for revenge. I want to be clear about that. I had stopped wanting revenge somewhere around the 3rd year of medical school, when I was too exhausted to want anything except sleep and a hot meal. But I won't pretend I didn't feel something sitting in that chair, watching the people who had called me worthless realize exactly how wrong they had been. Let me tell you how we got there. I was 22 when I married their son. His name was Preston, and I loved him the way only young people can love. Completely, without reservations, without thinking to ask whether the family I was marrying into would ever accept me. I was a first-generation college student from a small town in Kentucky. My mother had cleaned houses for most of her adult life. My father left when I was 4. I had gotten myself to a state university on a partial scholarship and a lot of waitressing shifts, and I was finishing my last semester when Preston and I met in a biology lab. His family was old money from Connecticut. Not wealthy in a flashy way. Wealthy in the quiet, certain way that people who have never had to think about money tend to be. His mother, whom I'll call my mother-in-law, hosted charity galas and sat on the board of a local arts foundation. His father had inherited a commercial real estate firm and spent most of his time playing golf and attending alumni events. They were not cruel people exactly. They were the kind of people who had simply never had to make room for anyone who didn't already fit their world. I didn't fit. The first time I met them, Preston's mother looked at my shoes. They were clean but worn, a pair of flats I had owned since sophomore year, and smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. She asked polite questions about my family, and I answered them honestly because I didn't know yet that honesty wasn't what she was looking for. She wanted me to present well. I didn't. By the time Preston and I got engaged 8 months later, his mother had made her position clear. Not to me directly, but to him, in phone calls he thought I couldn't hear. She said I was after his money. She said I was after his money. She said I was not the kind of woman who could build the life their family expected. She said he was making a mistake. Preston married me anyway. I loved him for that. I still do, in the complicated way you love someone who tried but ultimately couldn't hold the line. We moved to Philadelphia, where he had a job at a finance firm, and I enrolled in a post-bac program to get the prerequisites I needed for medical school. I had wanted to be a doctor since I was 16 years old and sat with my grandmother in a county hospital for 6 hours waiting for someone to tell us whether her chest pain was serious. It was. And the doctor who finally came, a tired woman in her 50s who still managed to explain everything clearly and hold my grandmother's hand for a moment before she left. I never forgot her. I wanted to be her someday. My in-laws did not understand this ambition. My mother-in-law, when I told her I was applying to medical school, was quiet for a long moment and then said, "That's a very long road, honey. Do you really think that's realistic?" I told her I did. She told Preston privately that I was being selfish, that a wife should be building a home, not spending a decade in training, that it wasn't fair to him. Preston didn't defend me. He said she had a point, actually, that maybe I could look into something with a shorter timeline, nursing maybe, or physician assistant programs. I applied to medical school anyway. I got in. One school, a good one, in Pittsburgh. We moved. Preston found a position there, not as good as his Philadelphia job, but decent. For the first year, things were manageable. I studied. He worked. We were tired, but functional. Then I got pregnant. We hadn't planned it. I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time after I saw the test, trying to figure out how to feel. I was in my 2nd year of medical school. I was 26 years old. I was terrified and also, underneath the terror, something that felt almost like joy, a small, stubborn warmth that I didn't quite trust yet. I told Preston that evening. He was quiet in a way that frightened me. Then he called his parents. I don't know exactly what was said on that call because he took it in the bedroom with the door closed. But I know what the aftermath looked like. He came out 45 minutes later and told me that his parents thought this was a sign that the timing wasn't right for medical school, that I should take a leave of absence. That family had to come first. I told him I wasn't taking a leave of absence. What followed was 3 weeks of escalating pressure. His mother called me directly, something she rarely did. She told me that continuing medical school while pregnant was reckless, that I was already asking too much of Preston, that a good mother would reconsider her priorities. I told her, very calmly, that I would handle my own priorities. She told me, equally calmly, that she had always known I wasn't right for her son. Preston and I fought every night. He didn't ask me to quit. To his credit, he never said the word out loud, but he stopped being a partner. He stopped asking how I was feeling. He started coming home later. He started taking more trips back to Connecticut to visit his parents, sometimes for long weekends, without asking if I wanted to come. I stayed in school. I took my exams. I grew a baby, and I memorized pharmacology tables, and I cried in the hospital bathroom between clinical rotations because I was exhausted in a way I hadn't known it was possible to be exhausted. My grandmother flew up from Kentucky for 2 weeks when our daughter was born. She was 68 years old, and she had never been on a plane before in her life. She showed up at our apartment door with a suitcase and a Tupperware container of banana bread, and she looked at my daughter for the first time and said, "Well, she's got your eyes. She's going to be trouble." Then she laughed, and I cried, and she held me the way she had held me when I was a little girl, and everything was hard, and she was the only person who made it feel survivable. She stayed for 2 weeks, and she cooked, and she held the baby at 3 in the morning so I could sleep, and she told me every day that I was doing the right thing, that she was proud of me, that my daughter was going to grow up watching her mother be extraordinary, and that was worth more than anything. Preston's parents came to visit once. They stayed at a hotel. His mother held the baby for approximately 4 minutes, and then handed her back and said the apartment smelled like takeout. Preston left when our daughter was 14 months old. He didn't leave dramatically. There was no screaming, no throwing things. He just came home one Sunday and said he thought we had grown apart and he thought it was better to be honest. He was moving back to Connecticut. He would be there for our daughter, of course. He would provide financially. He was there, as it turned out, the way people are there when they are also somewhere else entirely. He called on birthdays. He sent checks that were adequate but not generous. He came to visit 3 times in her first 2 years in Connecticut. His mother never called again. I filed for divorce, finished my 3rd year, finished my 4th year, matched into a residency program in internal medicine at a hospital in Pittsburgh that I had wanted badly enough to cry when the email came. I had a 3-year-old who called my grandmother Dee, and had learned to sleep through my 4 a.m. alarms, and who I was terrified I was failing every single day. My grandmother flew out again for match day. She sat in the audience while I opened the envelope. When I read the name of the hospital out loud, she made a sound I had never heard from her before, something between a laugh and a sob, and she grabbed the hand of the woman sitting next to her, a stranger, and said, "That's my granddaughter." I framed the letter. It's on my wall in my office now, right next to my medical school diploma. Residency is 3 years, and then I did a fellowship in hospital medicine, and by the time I was fully practicing, I was 34 years old and my daughter was 8, and my grandmother had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure, which is the particular cruelty of a life spent caring for other people, that the person who held everyone else together ends up in a hospital bed herself. She was not afraid. That was the thing about her. I sat with her during her first hospitalization, and she looked around the room with what I can only describe as professional curiosity and said, "I suppose you know all these people." I did know most of them, actually, and she took a kind of satisfaction in that, I think, in knowing that her granddaughter was on the other side of it now. That when someone else's family sat in a waiting room, frightened and lost, I was one of the people who would come through the door. She lived 3 more years after that diagnosis. Good years, mostly. I took her to see the ocean, which she had never seen. I took her to a Broadway show in New York, and she dressed up for it like it was the most important occasion of her life, which I think she felt it was. She met my daughter's friends and came to school plays and sat on the back porch of my house on summer evenings and talked about everything and nothing. When she died, she left me her house in Kentucky, a small, paid-off house on a quarter-acre lot that was worth about $180,000 in the current market, and a savings account that she had been adding to quietly for 30 years, $10 at a time, $20 at a time, birthday money and Christmas money, and money set aside from the small pension she had from 22 years working in a school cafeteria. The account had $47,000 in it. I sat with the estate lawyer and cried in a way I hadn't cried since she died, because I kept thinking about all those years of $10 deposits. All those years of setting something aside for me, even when she had very little. That was the thing she did. She found a way to give even when giving cost her. I put the money in a fund for my daughter's education. It felt right. The letter came 14 months after my grandmother's funeral. It was from a law firm in Connecticut. On behalf of my former in-laws. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time because I wanted to be sure I was understanding it correctly. The claim was, essentially, this: that my former father-in-law had lent my grandmother money years ago, a loan of $25,000, they alleged, to help her with medical expenses, and that this loan had never been formally documented but had been understood to be repayable, and that her estate therefore owed them that amount plus interest, which by their calculation came to just under $38,000. I stared at that letter for a long time. My grandmother had never mentioned a loan, not once. In all the years we talked about money and about the hard times and about how she had managed when things were tight. She was meticulous about debt. She hated owing people. The idea that she had taken $25,000 from my former in-laws and kept it from me for years was not something I could make fit with the woman I had known for 34 years. I called the estate lawyer. He had never heard of this loan either. There was no documentation in her papers, no record of any transfer, no correspondence. I called a colleague who was friendly with a probate attorney and described the situation. The probate attorney said very carefully that claims like this were not unheard of and that some of them were legitimate and some of them were not, and that the best thing I could do was respond through counsel and ask them to produce their documentation. My former in-laws' counsel produced nothing. A letter. Some vague language about an informal arrangement. No bank records. No promissory note. No evidence that the money had ever changed hands at all. I found my own attorney. I want to be honest about something. I did not know when I first responded to that letter how this would end. I was angry. Of course I was angry, but I was also genuinely uncertain. I thought about the possibility, however small, that there was something I didn't know. Some conversation my grandmother had that she never told me about. Some arrangement made in a moment of desperation that she had been too proud to mention. So I was careful. I instructed my attorney to be professional and thorough and not to assume bad faith until the evidence warranted it. The evidence warranted it fairly quickly. When my attorney requested documentation and formal discovery, what came back was nothing credible. The loan had allegedly been made in cash. There were no witnesses who could be produced. The timeline they described was internally inconsistent. The dates didn't align with my grandmother's medical history, and her actual records, which I obtained, showed no hospitalizations during the period they claimed the money was needed. My attorney laid all of this out in a very clear letter and suggested that the matter be dropped. My former in-laws did not drop it. They escalated. They hired a second firm. The new firm filed a formal claim against the estate, which by this point I had been appointed to administer. I sat with my attorney in her office, and she walked me through the options. We could settle. Pay something. Make it go away. Avoid the time and stress of a proceeding. Or we could fight it. I thought about my grandmother setting aside $10 at a time for 30 years. I told her we were going to fight it. The proceeding was scheduled at the county courthouse in Pennsylvania, where the estate was being administered. I had arranged to take a half day from the hospital. I put on a dark blazer and a pair of good shoes and drove there with my attorney, who had been thorough and calm and exactly what I needed through all of this. My former in-laws were already in the hallway when I arrived. I hadn't seen them in nearly 8 years. My mother-in-law looked older, which I noted without satisfaction. My father-in-law was standing slightly behind her, looking at his phone. Neither of them looked up when I walked in. Their new attorney was a man I hadn't seen before, younger than I expected, in a good suit carrying a leather portfolio. He turned when I came through the door and looked at my attorney first, as people usually do, and then looked at me, and I watched him do the math. The blazer, the ID badge clipped to my lapel that I had forgotten to take off. The name on the badge. "Dr. Renner?" he said. "Yes," I said. He glanced at his portfolio. He glanced at my mother-in-law. He was a professional, so he recovered quickly, but there was a moment, just a moment, where the machinery of whatever case he had prepared shifted and recalibrated. Because physicians carry weight in civil proceedings. Because Dr. Renner, administrator of this estate, was not the struggling young woman his clients had perhaps described to him. My mother-in-law finally looked up. The expression on her face was the one I had imagined in my lowest moments over the years, and I won't pretend it didn't matter. It did matter, not because I needed her to feel bad. I genuinely don't need that anymore. But because it was the first honest thing her face had ever shown me. For the first time in the nearly 12 years I had known her, she looked at me and saw me clearly. Without the story she had written about who I was, we went into the room and the matter was heard, and I won't narrate the procedural details because they are dry and technical and beside the point. What matters is that their claim was dismissed. The judge found no credible evidence of any loan, no documentation, no corroboration. The estate was held intact. My former in-laws were ordered to pay costs. Their attorney shook my attorney's hand afterward. He looked at me briefly and said, "Congratulations, doctor," in the tone of a man who understood that his clients had wasted his time and theirs. I thanked him. In the hallway, my former mother-in-law walked past me without speaking. My former father-in-law paused for a moment, and I thought he might say something, and then he didn't, and they walked out together, and that was the last I saw of them. My daughter was 10 by then. She asked me that evening, at dinner, what had happened at the courthouse. I had told her only that there had been a disagreement about Gigi's things, that some people had made a claim that wasn't true, and that we had gone to fix it. She asked if it was fixed now. I told her yes. She asked if G would have been proud of me. I had to take a breath before I answered that. I looked at her across the table, this 10-year-old who had G's directness and my stubbornness and more sense than most adults I knew, and I said yes. I thought she would have been proud. I thought she would have had a lot to say about the whole situation, some of it printable and some of it not, and then she would have made us both tea and talked about something else entirely, because she had a gift for knowing when something was finished and needed to be set down. We had tea that evening. I made it the way she used to, strong with a little honey. I sat on my back porch for a long time after my daughter went to bed. It was October, and the air had that particular quality of October evenings, cold and clear, and smelling faintly of leaves. I thought about all the years, the worn-out flats and the phone calls I wasn't supposed to hear, the hospital bathroom where I'd cried between rotations, the 4 a.m. alarms and the 3-year-old sleeping through them, and the residency acceptance letter that I had read out loud to a room full of strangers and one person who mattered. I thought about the $10 deposits. I have a good life now. I have a daughter who is curious and kind, and not afraid of hard things. I have work that means something. I have a house with a back porch where I can sit on October evenings and feel the weight of the past without being crushed by it. My grandmother told me once when I was about 15 and going through something difficult that felt enormous at the time and looks small now, that the people who tried to make you small were usually afraid of the room you were going to take up in the world. She said, Don't shrink for them, baby. Don't you dare shrink. I didn't. I used to think the hardest part of my story was being left. Preston leaving. His parents deciding I wasn't worth the effort. Standing in an apartment by myself at 26, pregnant, exhausted, trying to memorize drug interaction charts while everything else was falling apart. That felt like rock bottom at the time. It felt like proof that maybe they were right about me. But I've been thinking about that differently lately. Because the leaving, as painful as it was, forced me to find out what I was actually made of. And I think that's the thing nobody tells you about being underestimated. It can either destroy you or it can clarify you. It stripped away everything I was doing for other people's approval and left only what I was doing for myself. For my daughter. For the memory of a woman who had set aside $10 at a time for 30 years because she believed in a future she wouldn't live to see. That's the part that gets me every time. Not the courtroom. Not the look on my mother-in-law's face. It's the $10 deposits. It's the discipline of someone who never had much, choosing every single month to put something away anyway because she had decided that the person she loved was worth that kind of quiet, unglamorous dedication. There was no grand gesture there, no dramatic sacrifice, just a woman doing a small thing consistently for a very long time, out of pure conviction. I think about that whenever I'm tired. Whenever the work feels like too much, or I wonder whether I'm giving my daughter enough, or I lie awake at 3 a.m. with that familiar low hum of self-doubt, I think about those deposits and I think about what they represent. Not money, but a particular kind of faith. The kind that doesn't require the outcome to be guaranteed before you commit to it. What my former in-laws did, making that claim, fabricating that loan, trying to take the one concrete thing my grandmother left behind, says everything about what happens when people spend their lives making choices from a place of smallness. Not cruelty, exactly. Smallness. The belief that there isn't enough, that someone else having something means they have less. My grandmother had almost nothing by comparison, and she gave constantly. They had everything, and they reached for more that wasn't theirs. That's not a mystery. That's just cause and effect. The life you build by contracting, by hoarding, by diminishing, by deciding other people's worth based on their bank account, is a life that eventually runs out of room. And the life you build by expanding, by doing the work, by putting $10 away even when you're scared, is a life that keeps growing. My daughter is 10. She asked me if Gigi would have been proud. I think G would have been proud the day I stayed in medical school when everyone told me to quit. I think she would have been proud every single day since. And I think the best thing I can do with the life she helped build is to show my daughter that the same is possible for her. That being told you are not enough is not a verdict. That the people who try to make you small are not the authority on what you become. Don't shrink, that's all. Just don't shrink.